Well, Matt, it's a delight to be able to see you and be on Skype and to have you as part of this conversation series, which is titled "The Future is Calling Us to Greatness."
Well, it's good to be with you and with all the other thinkers that you brought on board and
Mm.
activists. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. It's been. I interviewed Bill McKibben just the other day. He was amazing.
Oh, I bet.
Um, Well, Matt, one of the things I'm doing at the start is I'm asking all of my guests to introduce themselves and say, and don't be bashful. I mean, share with us what you're best known for, what you're proudest of, what you're involved in, and take at least 5 minutes or longer, and just help us get who is, for those few people who might not know you, who is Matt Fox? Help us get you.
Well, for 34 years, I was a member of the Dominican Order in the Catholic Church and a priest for a good number of those years. Then I was fired by the Pope, Ratzinger, the Inquisitor General of our time, who later became Pope Benedict XVI. So I got a pink slip, and that was because they said, among other things, I was working too closely with Native Americans, and I called God Mother, and I was a feminist theologian. Those were their objections, and I prefer original blessing to original sin. And original blessing was one of my books that, what should I say, caught the attention of the Vatican, and they seem to have a great investment in original sin. I myself believe the whole universe is a blessing, obviously, and for 13.8 billion years, it did a lot of things, but it also gave birth to our species. It may not have been its wisest choice, but it took a risk, a real gamble in doing so. So I think blessing is, of course, a theological word for goodness, and my Bible begins with the fact that creation is good, and in fact, it's very good when it's all taken together. So that's what original blessing is. So I can't take the condemnations from the Vatican too seriously. So I've written over 30 books, and the key is this movement of creation spirituality, which is, of course, a green spirituality. It's about the sacredness of creation. Mm-hmm. And one of my books is on the cosmic Christ, which is a marvelous archetype for naming the image of God that every creature is.
Yes.
Or, if you will, the Buddha nature is another phrase that comes from the East, mm-hmm. that says the same thing. And in the Jewish tradition, the tradition of the image of God is applicable to all creation, not just to human beings. Mm-hmm. So it's about de-anthropocentrizing religion and rediscovering our place in the larger picture of the grace that nature is. And in my writings, I've rediscovered these marvelous mystics of the West, such as Hildegard of Bingen, who was a green prophet in the 12th century, and a Benedictine abbess, Meister Eckhart, who was a marvelous genius, spiritual genius, ecumenist, and a green thinker, creation spiritual thinker of the 13th and 14th century. He was a contemporary of Rumi, really. He was 13 when Rumi died, and they have a lot in common. My most recent book shows that. And even Thomas Aquinas has a profound mystical side that's been ignored by Thomas, that I've put out in my major work on Aquinas. So what I've been researching and teaching is not off the top of my head. This is a tradition that's been ignored in the rush to anthropocentrism that I think followed, frankly, the birth of the modern era with the printing press and the invasion of the indigenous peoples all around the world from the European settlers and their military. And so I think what I've been trying to do then is to stir up, to push the restart button on Christianity. And needless to say, it's disturbed a few well-placed hierarchs along the way. Also, I've been very involved in alternative education, because over 35 years ago, I realized you can't teach spirituality in a European model of education that defines truth as clear and distinct ideas and leaves the heart out and the body out and the lower chakras out. So I designed programs Now, for a master's degree, and we had that program in Chicago for 7 years and brought it out here to Oakland, California for 12 years. And the Pope tried to kill it, which eventually he did. Then I started my own university for 9 years, University of Creation Spirituality. But the key is a pedagogy where we consciously try to develop right brain and left brain. And that is so important. And of course, it is about bringing feminism into education. Because the problem we have today is that we have knowledge factories. We don't have wisdom schools. And wisdom in both the Bible and around the world is feminine. And I think it's the patriarchal explosion, really, of the modern era that banished wisdom and has been invested exclusively in knowledge. And while we've discovered a lot of things with knowledge, we're obviously in a very dangerous place today because we're missing the wisdom. And so I think I talk about the 4 E's. This is I think the agenda, the moral agenda for greatness, if you will, or for survival and generosity that we have to address today. And the E of education, we have to do education differently. The E of economics, we have to and can do economics differently, incorporating all the beings of the planet as to their survival and health, and not just the human.
Yes.
And then ecumenism, we have to religion differently. We have to gather the wisdom from all the world's spiritual traditions. What do we have in common? And what new can we learn from each other? And how does it link up with today's science to get the job done? The job being, obviously, the survival, sustainability of the planet as we know it, and our own species along with the others. And then finally, the 4th E is, of course, ecology. That's I think that's the setting in which we have to redefine our role on the planet. And it cuts through everything, and as does education, of course, is politics, economics, religion, medicine, agriculture, media, all of it we pass through the funnel we call education. And so education itself has to be critiqued. And I've been doing that on the ground, so to speak, for over 30 years and with powerful results.
Yeah, yeah. Well, amen. And I just want to publicly honor you and acknowledge you, because back in 1988, which is when I was first introduced to Thomas Berry, Albert LaChance was doing a class on the New Catholic Mysticism, and February 1st, 1988, I was introduced to Thomas Berry's thinking, and within 45 minutes of hearing this presentation of the universe story, what's now called Big History, or the Epic of Evolution, I had goosebumps up and down my arms and legs. I started to cry, and I realized I'm going to spend the rest of my life popularizing this message. And I wasn't finding too many people speaking with a strong green heart within Christianity. And here I was pastoring my first church. I was the town parson. I married, buried, and baptized everybody in this little Massachusetts town of 1,400 people. And I was actually contemplating leaving the ministry and didn't know whether I could stay in the church. And it was specifically your writings, Original Blessing, and then later Cosmic Christ, and Sally McFaig. The two of you were the two people that were most significant in my life in helping me to interpret Christianity in a completely ecological, evolutionary context and a prophetic context. So I just want to honor you as a mentor and an older brother on the path. And not only have I read about 7 or 8 of your books, but I've also just been really deeply appreciative of the way that you have integrated the arts in a prophetic way: music, dance, poetry, all the various art forms, because that's what touches our hearts. That's what touches our souls. Prophets can also so powerfully speak using various artistic forms. And the fact that that's been core to your own pedagogy has just been, it's been an inspiration and a model, I think, for others. And the other thing I want to finally just mention and honor you for is that I've been announcing, or sort of proclaiming, what I'm calling Religion 3.0, or the Evidential Reformation, that I'm claiming is going to make the Protestant Reformation look puny in comparison, because it's impacting all the religions of the world, where religion 1.0 is the authority of elders, religion 2.0 is the authority of the sacred texts, religion 3.0 is the authority of global collective intelligence. It's the authority of evidence, the evidential tradition. And I call myself an evidential mystic, and I partly get that from your inspiration. So, and the fact that you actually went, as I understand it, to Wittenberg and tacked your own theses on the door or something. Tell me about that.
I did that. That's true. Well, when Ratzinger made himself Pope, I knew the Catholic Church was in for even darker times because I'd been on a 12-year battle with this fellow. And so I was wrestling because I had an invitation at Pentecost to go to Germany and give some talks at a healing center there. And Pentecost is, of course, the traditional celebration of the birth of the church. And I was feeling it. I said, well, I can't be too excited about the birth of the church or what's coming down with Ratzinger. So I asked for a dream. And because I was actually thinking of dropping out, but then I said, well, that wouldn't be fair to the sponsors because they've been working on this for a year and blah, blah, blah. So I asked for a dream. I was dumbfounded. Middle of the dream, I got the message. Here's the first German Pope in 700 years. And this other German guy named Luther went and pounded theses at Wittenberg 5 centuries ago. So I got up at 3:30 in the morning, sat down in a rocking chair with a yellow tablet and said, I bet I have 25 theses inside of me. So when the sun came up at 6:30, I had 95 theses in front of me. I was exhausted. I went to bed, got up at 10, read it over and said, hey, I can believe in these. So then I did the two things. I did my original assignment at the Healing Center, gave a couple talks, and then we went to Wittenberg and pounded the theses at the door there. And then later, when the Italians started translating my books just 2 or 3 years ago, and I was invited to Rome, and I said, well, fine, I'll come, to give some talks and whatnot. But I said, I think I should do something else too. And this was at the height of the pedophile priest crisis.
Oh, yes, yes.
And I said, so I translated my theses into Italian. And I said, now what church? And I cited on Maria Maggiore, which is a basilica where Cardinal Law, who is the kingpin of those who covered up priestly pedophilia, he passed one priest around to different parishes who had abused 150 boys. And he was elevated. He was promoted to run this 4th century basilica in Rome. So I chose that spot at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning to pound my theses in Italian. And there was quite a hullabaloo. The Vatican police beat up some of the people who were there. And the press was there. And it was something. But, that's communication in the 21st century. So I got some mileage out of the 95 theses in Italian, too. So
that's great. That's great.
Someone has to do these things,
Exactly.
Someone blowing the whistle on this Church One that you're talking about, the authoritarian thing that's out of control and is offering so little that is promising. Now, thank God we have a decent Pope at this time, but still Catholics and others should not be projecting their greatness, their responsibility on someone else, whether it's a Pope or anyone else. Mm-hmm. We all are responsible for creating a sustainable species and planet, and we can't just expect one person in funny outfits to do it for us.
Yeah.
Even if that person's good heart.
Yeah, amen. Well, one of the other things that I feel this deep kinship, this deep soul brothership with you, is around our mutual admiration and benefit from the life and the work of Thomas Berry. And I just find, to this day, I still call him my greatest mentor, and I'm just hugely grateful for his influence, and I still find myself speaking things that he originally planted, or in some cases, Miriam McGillis or Brian Swim, or Mary Evelyn Tucker or yourself, others who have taken his work and then gone in other directions and furthered it in many ways, furthered his legacy. Anything that you'd like to say about how Thomas has made a difference in your own life, especially given this theme of this series that the future is calling us to greatness?
Well, like you, I owe Tom a whole lot, and he was a great human being and a great thinker and a great man. Brian's reminded me last year that it was 30 years ago that he and I met Tom at the same time because we invited Tom to my school, my institute in Chicago. It was January. And so I heard Tom speak for the first time, though I'd read several of his books that had not been published yet. You know, the one thing about Tom, he would write books and then put them in his drawer. That's one reason I think he kept the Vatican off his trail for decades.
Yeah, the first time I met him, he gave me a complete copy of the Riverdale Papers, and I was amazed.
Yeah, yeah. But I'll never forget slashing through the snow with him, going to supper together in Chicago in January. And I was writing my first book on Hildegard of Bingen. And he went on about Hildegard. He's the first one I ever met on the planet who knew about Hildegard. I mean, this guy, you know, he was broad and he was deep in his knowledge. And so, I mean, he was, you know, I heard him speak numerous occasions. He taught in our school here, there, everywhere. One thing he wrote to me, I think it was on my 60th birthday or something. He said, I think of you less as a priest and more as a shaman.
Yes.
And I consider that a compliment, especially
Amen.
since I've more work on shamanism. And, you know, he just said a lot of things. You know, he was, as you say, he was not only a great intellect and so forth, but he could see into people. He had great intuition about people. And, but he had this way about him that was kind of aw shucks and laid back. And, you know, he never screamed when he spoke or anything. In fact, often you could barely understand him. So, I mean, he had this off-putting way about him that was humble. But there were just so many lessons that he shared along the way with me, some of them personal, and some of them obviously intellectual. He once said to me that the only one in his order who he could communicate with was a lay brother who drove a tractor, that the others all thought he was crazy, studying Native American languages and Chinese and all these world religions and science. They thought he was off the wall. But one guy he could communicate with was a fellow who drove the tractor and didn't have too much education, so he didn't judge him one way or the other. So there's just so many stories about our man here that are great to share because, you know, it's like blind people in the elephant. We all have different stories to share, and they help to add up to what a special human being he was.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I met Tom was at his place in Riverdale, and we went out to the Broadway diner, and Brian Swim, of course, in the preface to The Universe is a Green Dragon, writes about his experience at that same diner, eating over Greek salad, and all of a sudden I realized I was having a Greek salad across the table from Tom's Berry, and I had this sort of woo sort of experience. It was a delightful experience. I used to bring my sleeping bag and sleep under this 500-year-old great red oak tree that overlooked the Hudson River.
And that was such a mentor to him. I know he had a love of that tree.
He dedicates the Dream of the Earth to that tree.
There you go.
Well, Matt, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is one of the ways that you've integrated the arts and also really kept in touch with young people and young energy. For a long time, I don't know if you're still doing them, but I experienced a couple of your techno-cosmic masses. And I wanted you to just share a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, we're doing one October 19th, actually, just a couple of weeks from now. And the theme is cosmology. And Brian Swim is going to be there as our teacher. We always have a teacher. This is an effort to awaken worship and forms of worship by using rave, which is essentially an all-night dance to bring about a trance. But the rave movement is global. There are raves happening all over on many continents. And it's a way to, to make worship live again by using our bodies, and incorporates all the chakras. And so you dance, but you also use the multimedia, DJs and VJs, rap. So all these new art forms that we have in the 21st century, why shouldn't they be put to the use of good worship to awaken people and bring people together? And a year ago, we did it for 1,000 people at the Sounds True conference in Colorado. And it was very powerful. And people of many traditions show up and
Hmm.
get it.
Yeah.
We had rabbis there. We always have rabbis as part of it. And so I think it's a wonderful way. 68,000 people went to Burning Man this summer out in the desert in August, which is crazy and irrational, of course. We could go to the desert. Why not go in February or March? But no, August. But why do 68,000 people come out in August? Because they're hungry for ritual.
Yeah.
Humans need ritual. And it's not just humans, other species have rituals too. What created Stonehenge? It wasn't a desire for a new football team. It was creating a relationship between ourselves and the cosmos. And you do this through ritual. That's what real ritual is. It's about microcosm and macrocosm coming together. And we need this today. This ritual is a shortcut. Ceremony and ritual is the way our ancestors, for tens of thousands of years, taught their children. They didn't put them in a desk and say, stay still for 7 hours or we'll give you a drug because you got a disease. They learned things through dance and ceremony, and elders and young people working together and creating beautiful costumes and beautiful experiences together. That's what real ritual is about. And I think that we've been cut off because in the modern age, we've been taught to pray from the neck up and to read books. You see, what page are you on the right page? Oh, that drives me crazy when you go to church and you spend your time trying to find the right page. You have to be literate to pray in this culture, which is crazy, and praying isn't about reading. It's about opening the heart up.
Yes.
And that's where I learned so much from indigenous prayer, sweat lodges and vision quests. And I was at a Sundance again this summer. So powerful and so imbued with nature.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to stir up the fire in our bellies to save Mother Earth, is by reconnecting to Mother Earth in a sacred way. Yes. And that's what ceremony and ritual should be able to do. So the Cosmic Mass is in many ways an urban expression. Because we use DJs and all this, but most human beings are living in cities these days. So we've got to find ways to bring humans together, to create community, go through dimensions of joy and grief together. We always have a grieving dimension, and that's so important. People are carrying a lot of grief today, and we have very little outlet for it. And that's why it comes out often as anger or depression or violence.
Yes, exactly.
So we so underestimated the power of ritual and how important it is. And
I completely agree. In fact, while I was being turned on to your work and Sally McFaig's, two other people that were very influential in my life in the late 80s and early 90s, and in fact, I had a friendship with her until she died, Dolores LaChapelle, one of the amazing deep ecologists. And her book, Sacred Land, Sacred Sex, Rapture of the Deep, concerning deep ecology and celebrating life. Yeah, she gave me more of an appreciation. Dolores LaChapelle, Sacred Land, Sacred Sex, gave me more of an appreciation for why ritual and ceremony is so important given the nature of the human brain. And that's the way information has been carried from generation to generation, because it has to be memorized. It has to be embodied in the body and the emotions and connect us to the land and connect us to each other. And so I actually, while I was at my first church, it was Joanna Macy, you, Dolores LaChapelle, and Sally McFaig, who were sort of my deep nourishment. And I actually had a sweat lodge built on one of my parishioners' property, because I ended up doing some training with Tom Brown, the tracker, and learned to do sweat lodges and was, here I was, the pastor of the only church in a town of 1,500 people, and I've got this, one of my parishioners lived on a private pond, so we had this sweat lodge, but my congregation, most of them didn't know about it. It was my neo-pagan and feminist spirituality and goddess worshiping friends that, participated in that.
Oh, great. What denomination were you? What tradition?
United Church of Christ. I grew up Roman Catholic, but definitely didn't feel the call to celibacy and wanted to be married and have kids. And so I ended up becoming a United Church of Christ minister. I pastored 3 UCC churches, but I did have one foot in the Unitarian Universalist Association during most of that time. So I've sort of had one foot in the UUA and one foot in Protestant Christianity. But I still consider myself sort of Celtic in terms of sort of the integration of earthy earthy, evolutionary Christianity.
Sure.
But I
Sure.
also have a Taoist heart, and Buddhism has been it's important. So
Well, there you go. Post-denominational, yes.
yeah, exactly. Well, you know what? Your four E's: education, economics, ecumenism, and ecology reminded me of a couple of things. Thomas Berry talked about some of the main institutions, but he also talked about the four wisdom traditions that we need to hear most from now. The wisdom traditions, of course, of the classical religious cultures, but that's what we usually associate with wisdom. But we also need to hear, in fact, perhaps even more, the wisdom of indigenous peoples, the tribal peoples, first peoples, the peoples in touch with the land and still treat the land as an I-thou relationship. The wisdom of women, which, as you've said already, is not the same as the wisdom of men. The wisdom of women, and also the wisdom of science, the wisdom of the global collective intelligence movement, the sort of the scientific tradition. So I'm reminded of that there.
I couldn't agree more. And, the wisdom of the plants and of the stones and of the animals, this cannot be underestimated. I have a shaman friend who tells me the animals are having conferences today about us two-legged ones. They're worried about us. We're running things and we're not very bright. And so they're having conferences. How can they help us? And they've resolved two things. One, they can enter more fully into our dreams. And secondly, those who are our pets can assert themselves more. So you might check that out with your favorite cat or dog or horse, or whether they're becoming more assertive these days. But they're genuinely worried about us, and they should be.
That's good. Well, Matt, along this theme that the past is rooting for us, this, obviously this is a mythic mindset. The past isn't literally rooting for us, but when we hold in our hearts the fact that countless generations sacrificed and struggled, and had they not, in many cases, sacrificed, we wouldn't even be alive. So we owe our very existence to them. When we hold that in our hearts and allow that to motivate us in the present so that we can be a blessing to the future. So I find that in terms of mythic mindsets, that the idea that the past is rooting for us, past generations are rooting for us, and the future is calling us to greatness. Anything that you'd like to say along that theme?
Well, of course, another language for that is, of course, the role of the ancestors. And in the theological tradition, we could talk about the communion of saints. Yes. So all of that is the past. But, in the Middle Eastern tradition, the ancestors are not at the rear of the caravan, they're in the front. So they're not just something we look back at, they're pulling us too. They're not just cheering for us, they're actually leading in a way.
Oh, wow,
and so,
I love that.
Yeah, it's another way of seeing history, and I like it. When I first learned that several years ago, it just shifted some things in me.
Yeah.
But they're pulling for us, you might say. They're not just pushing from behind, they're pulling.
I love it.
And the way I put it is, if Francis of Assisi were alive today, or Dr. King, or someone else we admire, Gandhi, they wouldn't be just repeating what they did in their day. They would be out front today because they demonstrated the courage, which is the big heart, the greatness of soul, the magnanimity in their time that was required. And they didn't have, Francis didn't have a Gandhi to look up to. He had Jesus to look up to. He didn't have a Gandhi. So, to realize that we don't want to just put the ancestors behind us, I think that can be too comfortable. Also, you could say Jesus too, or Buddha. They're not just back in the past. Yeah. They're also calling us to greatness today.
Yes.
And I think that helps to shift the energy a little, and it's a little less linear, the caravan of history that we're involved in here. We've got cheerleaders in front and behind, and we also have the angels. I did a book with Rupert Sheldrake, the British scientist, on angels. I've done two books with him. One was on angels. It's just come out in a new version. And I met this amazing woman this year, Lorna Byrne. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's an Irish peasant woman who is 61, grandmother of 4, illiterate, but she's been seeing angels since she was 2 years old. and talking to them. And they told her not to tell anyone until they told her. And that was 6 years ago when her husband died. Then they said, okay, you can tell people. She's written 3 books now, well, dictated them because she doesn't write, about angels and what they have to say about humanity today. And it's really a lot of interesting perspectives. But one thing she talks about, which I really love, is unemployed angels. I interviewed her this past year at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. And she talked about unemployed. I said, unemployed angels? I said, I know a lot of unemployed people. Now do we have to start putting angels to work too? She said, at this time in history, God is pouring angels on the planet to help us, and no one's asking them for help. So there's a lot of unemployed angels. Now, I think that's really interesting. And you see, again, it's part of getting over our anthropocentrism to realize that there are other intelligences and other spirits that we do not include when we do our population census. And I think that the idea that, and of course, Rupert Sheldrake says that he thinks that the angels guide evolution. You know, and he points out that Darwin's co-developer of Darwin's theory, Wallace, broke with Darwin precisely over this subject. Darwin said it was pure chance, what was happening, what happened. And Wallace said, no, there must have been intelligent beings, i.e. angels, involved in this decision-making along the way. So I have to say, pick up the book on angels. We call it Angels and the Physics of Angels, with Rupert Sheldrake and myself. And it blows some minds. But in this new version, we bring Lorna Byrne into the discussion in the introduction, too. And, you know, it's significant that every spiritual tradition in the world has their teachings about spirits or angels, indigenous people and the more recent religions. And so there's something there. I think it deserves our attention.
Well, you know, it's interesting. One of the most significant books I've read in the last decade or two is Stuart Guthrie's book called Faces in the Clouds, a 1994 Oxford University Press. The subtitle is A New Theory of Religion. And he talks about the necessary role of personification in the human brain, that's what we do to enter relationship with our world, our inner and our outer world, our inner and outer reality, is we personify that, as we give human characteristics to what's more than human or other than human. And in fact, we completely miss... We can't understand myths and religions unless we get personification. That the Poseidon, for example, wasn't the god of the oceans or the spirit of the oceans, as if there was some non-material woo-woo entity separate from water. Poseidon was a personification of the incomprehensibly powerful and capricious seas. You know, Gaia was a personification of Earth. Eros was a personification of what we today call love or lust. And so when you get personification, then of course angels and spirits, and these are personifications of aspects of our inner and outer reality that when we understand that, they become inescapably real. I mean, you don't need to believe in Poseidon. The oceans are real. You don't need to believe in Gaia. You know, we need to honor Gaia. We need to respect Poseidon. You know, we need to respect Eros. But it's not about believing in these as separate entities. And I find that's the way I find useful to think about angels and demons and gods and goddesses, is this understanding. I call it the godification of reality, sort of the divine personification of our inner and outer reality. And I find that in audiences where I speak, literally from atheists to evangelicals, this is a way of thinking that's a bridge builder.
Interesting. Sometimes when I speak, I have people shut their eyes, so it's not a competition. And I say, how many of you have had experiences of angels, or you know people personally who you trust who tell you they have? Often it's 80% in the audience.
Fascinating.
You know? Yeah, it's an experiential, you know, again, it's about experience. It's kind of like...
Exactly.
Yeah, and anyway, that's just one aspect.
That's
something,
great.
But yeah.
Well, Matt, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, and I've been asking this of most of the guests in this series, is that, you know, peak oil, climate change, overpopulation, species extinction, the growing gap between the rich and the poor, and on and on. There's some really, really scary stuff that can depress us, that can move us into despair, that can and often should fuel us to anger and to action. How do you personally stay inspired on a day-by-day basis to do the work that you do in the face of some really scary stuff?
Well, you know, Thomas Aquinas, a great 13th century genius and theologian, says that despair is the most dangerous of all sins. That is not the worst. Injustice is the worst, but despair is the most dangerous, because when you fall into despair, he says, you no longer love yourself. Therefore, you can't love others. So compassion absolutely dies. So, and then he says the worst thing a person can do with their life is to teach despair. So I think these apocalyptic times in which we're living, which you've named well there, we have to be careful of this temptation to run on headlines of despair. For one thing, the media like to run on headlines of disaster, as we know, and we should resist that. We should not internalize that method. We have to find hope, possibility within our own message and within our own experience, and we have to hunt for it, hunt and gather these signs of hope. And so, like we've mentioned, the women's movement is a sign of hope. The men's movement is too. If we could shake up, I just wrote a brief article recently on what I call men behaving badly. All this stuff from the football teams and domestic violence and all this is coming out again. Say nothing of ISIS. What's really at stake here, I think, is a misdefinition of masculinity. That young men are not getting messages about their own greatness.
Yes.
I did this book on the sacred masculine a few years ago called The Hidden Spirituality of Men. And a Native American came up to me and he said, I taught in prisons for 12 years. He said, men in prison are notoriously busy projecting on others. They don't want to look inside. And I've been looking for 12 years to find what got him to look inside. Yours is the first book. I got him to look inside and to find the nobility inside. I have goosebumps now. I just love that phrase. Men are out of touch with their nobility. We've been beaten down by the Industrial Revolution, by our being cut off from Father Sky during the mechanical universe story that we're now displacing. And so men are questing. And frankly, I don't think our religious traditions are cutting the mustard at all. So the point is, though, we have to find what's a blessing in life. I love the definition of hope from David Orr, the eco-philosopher. Hope is a verb with the sleeves rolled up. Yes. Hope comes with work. And like you're busy working, trying to spread a solid message at this difficult time. I'm trying to do the same. And I know that I derive a lot of hope from the encounters I have with others who are suffering through the same questions, but also willing to roll up their sleeves and go to work. And we have to go to work, as I say, on education, on religion, on economics, on politics. I mean, all on agriculture. All of it needs reinventing, as of course Thomas Berry insisted. Yes. And so I think there's something to be said for rolling up our sleeves, and not, you have to balance it. Of course, meditation, silence, going into nature and experiencing the beauty and the affirmation and the affection from other animals, from plants, from rocks, to feel the sacredness of the greater than human world is of course what fills me up. And then of course, there are all kinds of poets and musicians and artists and filmmakers who are contributing, I think, to a more sane world. So I think we have to, it's like prayer, you have to structure some time to fill yourself up. And I consider everything I'm talking about to be prayer, to fill yourself up with the beauty of existence. And of course, to take the new creation story and to realize that the miracle that this planet is here, and that we are here on this planet, and that we as individuals are here on this planet. The miracle of existence. Eckhart says, isness is God. The raw bottom miracle is existence itself, and that we're invited on board.
Yes.
So the rest is, when you think about it, is kind of like details. Even the bad news. In the context of the great news of the holiness of existence, it just doesn't cut the mustard. It doesn't cut through.
Yeah. Well, this would be a great place for you to just sum up, because when I've been wanting to ask this question, and I think this is the time to do it. For people who aren't familiar with the fourfold path of creation spirituality, share sort of the essence of that, if you would.
Right. Well, I think we have here an archetypal pattern for what all of us undergo on our spiritual journeys. First, in what we call the via positiva, the positive path of awe and wonder, joy and delight. That gets the fire burning. It's about falling in love with life, not just one two-legged partner till death do you part, but with beings, with existence, and all the rest. And I think science can assist in this tremendously today, given the new creation story. The via negativa, the negative path, is a path of, first of all, silence, letting go of images, letting go of stories, letting go of problems, and just being. So that's what many people mean by mindfulness or meditation, to be in silence. But via negativa also includes, of course, the letting go that is involved in suffering. And suffering is a great teacher. Even the suffering we're in today, this is called the dark night of the soul. I think we're in a collective dark night of our species today. Yes. And that's not a bad place to be. It's a scary place. But it's not bad, because the dark night teaches us deep lessons of wisdom that we do not learn elsewhere. So being able to, the warrior in us has to be able to be present to the darkness and not go running off and going shopping or drinking or booze or becoming addicts to television or sports or something. The third
I've got to interrupt. I'm looking out the window here, and sitting on the fence post is this gorgeous red-tailed hawk. It's just a majestic being. So I just wanted to honor that right now.
Thank you.
My new warrior training name, my men's movement name is Dancing Hawk. So
good. Perfect! Wow, what an affirmation! What a blessing! Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so continue.
Right. Okay. Via creativa comes next. That's our creativity, and we can so underestimate creativity as a spiritual path, as a prayer. And when I talk to people, very often their most prayerful moments are in times of creativity.
Yes.
It's when you're not looking at your watch. You're too turned on. You're too going with the flow. And this, to me, theologically, is the Holy Spirit at work. The Holy Spirit is the creative spirit. And I think our entire educational system utterly underestimates the importance of creativity. I'm working now with inner city teenagers, taking my pedagogy there. And the key, 65% of black boys in America are dropping out of high school. Why? Because they're bored. And what's missing is creativity.
Right.
And so we show that we can bring it back. But creativity is across the board. Our culture has wanted to tell us, professional artists are creative and the rest of us are just bumbling along. Not so. We're all creative at many levels. Just balancing your checkbook is a hell of an act of creativity for most people. Then the fourth path is the via transformativa, the transformative path. And that is about stirring your creativity, not in just fame or making more money or growing your ego, but into service, the service of justice and healing and compassion and celebration. And that becomes the test, really, of our creativity. Are we putting it to the healthy use of generations to come? And these four paths, I think, name the real in-depth experiences of the spiritual journey. Like Rabbi Heschel said, there lies in the recesses of every human existence a prophet or a warrior. But you got to get down to the recesses. And I think these four paths help to name the recesses in all of us as human beings. And once you can name it, then you're in a via negativa one day, you're in a via creativa another. Cool. Your partner may be just the opposite. That helps. We're on the journey together. And it never stops. I envision it as a open-ended spiral that is continually growing and expanding and challenging us, of course, to stay alive.
Yes. Yeah. Beautifully articulated. Thank you. Well, one of the questions that Connie has invited me to ask all my guests, and I think
Connie.
I will do so, is that if you had the opportunity to have a dinner party where you had any three people in human history and yourself or a one-on-one over a beer or a glass of wine or a meal or whatever, but any three people in human history, either all of you together or one-on-one, who would those three people be and why would you choose them?
Wow. Wow. Have to limit it to three, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I think I'd like Einstein and Meister Eckhart and Hildegard of Bingen.
Yeah.
Why? Well, I think they're all profound thinkers out of the box in their own time. I love what Einstein says about how we've been given two gifts, rationality and the sacred gift of intuition. Rationality should serve intuition, he says, but we live in a society that honors the rational and has ignored intuition. And for me, intuition is,
or even dishonored intuition.
well, there you go. And to me, intuition is a synonym for mysticism. And so to put Einstein in a room with these two great mystics, both of whom cared a lot about science, although, of course, their science was centuries older, would be fun. I'd love to be taking notes and be the fly on the wall and, learn a lot.
Yeah.
So, and I think that also, of course, Hildegard brings the dynamism of this female warrior energy
Yes.
that we all need. And she didn't play second fiddle to anybody. She wrote books and told them they were surrounded by evil men and abbots telling them they grumbled like bears and acted like jackasses and all this. And I mean, she was kicking ass in the 12th century, and I have to respect her for that. In addition to making marvelous music, paintings, herbal remedies, and all the rest. I mean, she was a Renaissance woman. But I think that would just, didn't you remember this fellow who used to have a TV program where he did things like this way back in the 50s or 60s? I forget his name now. And he had a program like this where he put 3 or 4 historical figures at a table together. You should come up with that in the
Interesting.
21st century and take some of these names you're gathering. I'd be glad to be part of the exposition of that too. But there are so many marvelous figures from the past that I would love to connect with at a whole new levels. And like you say, that's part of the joy of being human, that our ancestors weren't dumb. And many were courageous, or we wouldn't be here, as you said. So let's bring them in the room together.
Yeah, amen, amen. Well, this question just occurred to me. I've not asked anybody else this question, but I'll probably ask the remaining 6 or 7 people in this series this question because I think it's a good one, and that is. Connie and I value death. We value mortality. We're so present to what a gift mortality and death and chaos, for that matter, is in the universe, and that without death, you couldn't have a universe at all scales, from the death of stars that create the periodic table of elements to the death of mountains that create healthy soil and so on. And I've asked myself this question a couple times in my life, that, if this was the last message I had to communicate to the world, what would it be? And it's a real focusing. And so here's just an off-the-wall question. If this was your last interview, if tonight you died, and this video was the last thing that especially this last segment, this last 5 minutes or so, were the last thing that you had to say to the world, and it went viral because everybody knew that this was Matt Fox's last statement to the world, or to people, young people, old people, whoever, what would you say? Just off the top of your head, off your heart.
Well, what comes to my mind right away is a month ago we had the memorial service for Rabbi Zalman Schachtner. It was on his 90th birthday. It had begun to be planned as his birthday, and then he died. And so we had this memorial service. It was marvelous in Boulder, where he lived for many years. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was a film. He was interviewed this past year, his 89th year. And he talked about how, he said, life has been a privilege. And he said, I've loved and I've been loved, and he went on. But I think, to me, that's the phrase. Can we all say our life has been a privilege? Because that is about gratitude, isn't it? Meister Eckhart said, if the only prayer you say in your whole life is thank you, that would suffice. Yes. So that would be my message. Live your life as if it is a privilege, because it is. It's a
Amen.
hell of a privilege to have been here. And and don't waste it. Don't squander it. Don't spend your life as a couch potato. Stand up and be counted, and develop your gifts, whatever they are, and and including your moral outrage. That's part of grief
Yes.
is getting in touch with our moral outrage and dealing with it, in a nonviolent way. So and but steering it like King did, like Gandhi did, like Jesus taught people to do, and the Buddha too. So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Live your life as if it is a privilege, because it is.
Yeah.
And that's really
Yeah,
all I have to
yeah,
say.
that's fabulous. One question that I wanted to ask earlier and I'd forgotten, but I don't want to conclude this without asking, and that is for those of us who are authors or aspiring writers. You're one of these amazing people. I've often referred to you as one of these people who must write with two hands. I mean, you're producing, you consistently produce not just books, but great books, amazing books. What's your discipline? Like, how do you like, before such and such a time of day, all you do is focus on writing? Like, what discipline do you use to be able to have that creative flow on such a consistent basis?
Well, I have had to find a discipline because while I've been writing books, I've also been administrating programs and even a university and nonprofit and all that stuff and traveling and all. So, but my what I've learned about myself is that I write in the morning. If I have a particular project, I'll get up early. For writing my first Hildegard book, I had only the Christmas break, about 6 weeks between mid-December and late January, to write my book on illuminations. Now, I had done the research for years. I taught her, but writing it is another thing. So I got up at 3:30 every morning and got it done in that 6 week time for the most part. Um, but so I've always say, if you love something enough, you find the time. And I love writing. I learn so much when I write, and I'm blessed to have had an audience, publishers, and so that motivates me to get up early. So that's been my modus operandi for many years. Um, now that I'm older, I don't have so much administrative burden, thank God. Um, but of course, I have some limits on my energy that I didn't have before either. So, but for me, I love what Heschel says. He says, learning is not for life, learning is life. And that so resonates with my experience. I just love to learn. And writing forces you to learn. It forces you to research, but to bring together research that in some coherent form that allows you to tell others about the exciting things you've learned. And so it's a love affair, and that gets you up early in the morning if you have to. But I think everyone has to find their own rhythm. Some
Yeah.
people may be able to write better at night. But myself, I do the writing in the morning, then I'll editing in the afternoon, or of course I do administration in there someplace in the afternoon. But that's how I've done it over the years. And it is true that I've written quite a bit when I look back on it, and yet I've been kind of busy doing other things too, like administration and raising money. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And even declaring bankruptcy, which I did a few years ago, because the ballroom we had for the Cosmic Mass, I wasn't able to find a loan for to fix up and so forth. So I've had my bumps and bruises and wounds along the way, but that's all part of living too, and
Yeah.
and learning. It
Yeah.
also puts you in the camp with others who go bankrupt, of which there are a very great number in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, amen. And Matt, I just again, as I shared earlier, you've been such an inspiration and an older brother on the path for me for decades now. And I just honor you and your work, and I just hope your health continues, and you continue to be able to share both your pedagogy, your way of teaching, and the bringing the arts together, the left and right brain, and all that, but also the prophetic edge. I think that's so needed in our world. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you, younger brother, for the wonderful work you're doing, including this series that you put together. You have a very fertile imagination yourself, and you and Connie both. Your road trip on behalf of Mother Earth is a marvelous thing. Every place I go, I hear people who have been fed and nourished by your teachings and preaching. Yeah,
Cool, cool.
carry on.
All right, thanks. You too, brother. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.